me just briefly share about Seeds. So Seeds was established in 1994 as a voluntary organization, particularly with the goal of building resilience of the people who are exposed to disasters. And we have been kind of responding to all the major disasters within India. So currently, some of my team members are also uh, responding to the situation in Odisha because of the cyclone situation there. So we have been working throughout the India as well as some of the neighboring countries, particularly Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar. So we have been also awarded by a prestigious award by the government of India, which is Netaji Subhash Chandra Apada Puraskar. So this is in recognition of the of Seeds work on the disaster management across India. And we have a dedicated team from various background, like starting like our co-founders are urban planners, we have engineers, we have architects, social experts, and communication experts who all are passionately working towards the vision of seeing the resilient communities throughout India. Uh, so first, why? Like why we need to talk about disaster management. So if you look at the vulnerability of our country in terms of the geographic vulnerability, so more than 50% of land is vulnerable to earthquake, and out of this, 12% is vulnerable to the severe earthquake. And we have seen some of the bigger earthquake, like say in our memories also, like 2001, we have seen Gujarat earthquake. We have also seen a Sikkim earthquake. So we have seen what kind of devastation earthquake can cause within the community. 68% of our land is vulnerable to droughts, and this varies from north to south. You can see on the map. The 12% of land is vulnerable to floods, and some of the areas are seeing the recurrent flood every year during the monsoon season. So there is no way out of the flood. I think the communities are living with the flood, and this area is vulnerable, and we are also seeing the new areas which are being flooded, either in the form of flash flood and the other issues. 8% of our land is vulnerable to cyclone. We all are seeing the current news of the cyclone Yas, which has made landfall today morning. But we have also seen in the last 10 days, even our western coast was affected by the cyclone. And what we are seeing is also the change in terms of the intensity of cyclones, and partly due to also the impact of the climate change, because otherwise we haven't seen this simultaneous cyclone in western as well as eastern coast of India. On top of the geographical vulnerability, we are also seeing some of the issues, and we are seeing the impact of the variability into the climate. And some of this impact is seen within the communities where we are working. So some of the key changes which we are seeing is the heat stresses are increasing. There are issues related to too much water in one location, and there are issues of too little water in some other location. So the problem because of water is increasing. Some of the disaster are impacting the urban areas, and currently in terms of our system, we are not really equipped enough to handle the large scale urban disasters. So that is also one area of worry which we are seeing. And we are also seeing forest fires, particularly in the Himalayan region. And not to forget that pandemic is still going on, and we have seen the devastating impact of the second wave. And I'm sure, like lots of people have been affected within our own networks and within our own families. So these are the current problems which is in a way forcing us to think about disaster management issues and how we should solve this. Now, we have talked about vulnerabilities and all that, but like what this vulnerability is all about. So if you can see the slide, the basically uh, a risk is a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So on the first picture, you will see a volcano place, and there is no habitation. So, so there is nothing called natural disaster. There is only natural hazards. So earthquake, floods, landslide, all this phenomena are natural phenomena which is going to happen. When they create disaster is when we intervene in terms of our own either planning issues, the settlement issues, without thinking of the hazard risk of that particular area. And we when we combine all this, then as a manifestation of that, we are seeing the losses in terms of the lives, we are seeing losses in terms of the economic losses, and of course damages in terms of whatever the infrastructure which we have built because of our own developmental initiatives. uh, and now what is disaster management? So if you like as it is shown on the slide, there are majorly three phases in terms of the disaster. So starting is a normal phase where things are okay, nothing is happening. Then you have an event or a shock taking place in terms of the emergency, and in during that time you start with the emergency response. As we have seen currently, lots of civil societies are helping in terms of either providing the surge capabilities to the health system or providing any other facilities which are required in terms of the oxygen and all that. And then we have a recovery phase immediately after the emergency response phase, and there are various interventions which we do as part of the recovery phase to bring back the situation to the normal phase. So there are various set of interventions which various stakeholders are they plan their interventions, and that includes the government, private sector, as well as the civil society at large. uh, in terms of the normal phase, that's where you can also see this the graph of the media response. So as you see in this graph, the biggest media response we see is only after the emergency response, when the disaster has already occurred, and we see how various communities are suffering because of that shock. And I will come to this later also, but this is also one of the issue, that why the disaster management is not getting enough recognition during the normal situation or even the recovery period, and why we are more focused on the emergency response issue. In terms of the phases of disaster, so after any disaster event, we have a response. So depending on the scale and the impact of disaster, the intervention of your response will vary. So for an example, right now uh, we are providing support in terms of oxygen concentrators. Uh, uh, there is also support in terms of the ration kits for the pandemic response, but that might change in terms of the cyclone or flood or earthquake. So, and this period lasts, let's say, typically either 10, 15 days, 1 month, or 3 months, depending on the scale of disaster. Uh, After response, we get into the early recovery phase, where we do a intervention within the affected communities around bringing them back to the normal situation. So that will be around the built environment in terms of shelter, schools, hospitals, or even the interventions. We also, in terms of the early recovery, we also look at the other infrastructure, be it the road infrastructure or the electricity infrastructure, which needs immediate attention and need a rebuilding. And the third phase is the rehabilitation and reconstruction. So this phase is about providing the longer term needs of the communities. This will include activities like permanent shelters, rebuilding of the systems within particular community, the large scale infrastructure which needs to be there. So this phase normally, let's say, from in terms of the time duration, it might go from 1 to 5 years, depending on the scale of the disaster. The fourth one is preparedness. So this phase is about how we improve the existing response mechanism, which will ensure that we have a minimum losses. So the preparedness phase talks about improving our early warning systems. So currently you might have seen the news, the IMD forecast for cyclone, that where it is going to make the landfall and all that. And based on that, you have various strategies within the communities, either in terms of evacuation, ensuring that they have a safe shelter to take refuge during the time of emergency. Then it also talks about establishing various systems in terms of the standard operating procedures, that what would be the roles of various key stakeholders, and even within the key stakeholder, like how different departments are going to respond after any disaster situation. There are clear standard operating procedures for each of those response, and including the civil society. Some of the civil society, like for an example, we within seeds, we also have SOPs in terms of how we will respond, how we will do a intervention as part of the early recovery. And the final phase is about the disaster risk reduction issues. So it's also it covers some of the softer components in terms of building the capabilities of the communities, in terms of making them aware about their own risk, and building the systems within that community, which will ensure that for the next disaster, they would be able to respond in a better manner. So the two arrow which you see in the below, the three phases, response, early recovery, rehabilitation, normally takes place after any major disaster event. And the fourth and fifth phase is an ongoing phase, and that can happen in a normal situation. And the last arrow, that all these phases should have a resilience building as part of the overall focus, because if we are too much focused on response, the cost and the efficiency of response will vary from place to place. That's what we have seen. So now, what is resilience basically? So I would like to briefly touch upon the key elements of resilience. So first is the context. So either the resilience you are talking about of one community, one ward, one city, one district, one state, or a country as a large, or even one family. So the resilience for what? So first question, first element is the context setting for building the resilience. The second is kind of looking at the potential of the shocks and stresses. So shocks normally refers to a major disaster event or probability of a major disaster event occurring in that particular system. And stresses are day-to-day ongoing problems. So it might be a food shortage, high fuel prices, or even the waste management, or any other issues which is bothering that system on a day-to-day basis. Based on the capacity to deal with this disturbance, we will arrive at the reaction, which is the fourth element. So third element is talking about what is the exposure, the exposure in terms of like for a particular area, what is that risk, and what is that potential number of people who might be affected during because of the exposure. Sensitivity as part of the system itself, what are the sensitivity in that particular system towards responding to shocks or stresses. And the third is adaptive capacity. So what are the existing system which are in place to respond to both shocks and stresses at large. And based on this capacity to deal with the disturbance, you will arrive at the four situation after any event. Either you can bounce back better, so you kind of improve the system pre-event and post-event because of your intervention based on the risk assessment. The second one is bounce back. So you normally go back to where you were before that event. Recover, but worse than the before. So based on your capability, you might recover, but your capability of that system might be worse than what it was before. And the finally is the total collapse. And we have seen after some of the disasters, the systems at various level also collapses, and that will lead to a higher problems within that particular system, be it a community or a one district or locality or a state. That way. So these are the key component of resilience. Of course, there are lots of other element of it, but broadly, in terms of framework, this is how the resilience framework look like in terms of the situation. Now, the question is that what is the linkage between disaster management and the development per se? So if you look at the SDG goals and the outcome of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, they have clearly established the linkages between the development and the disaster risk reduction issues. But two or three things which we have seen even on ground. One is that if you don't have disaster risk reduction as an integral part of the social and economic development, you can't ensure the sustainable development for that place. So there is a clear demand in terms of including the disaster risk reduction issue as part of any development initiatives, because what we have seen is that lots of development initiative in itself will also create some of the risk for that particular system. And if we don't have those checks and balances, we might increase the risk of particular community. The second is that every disaster has a direct or indirect impact on the communities. So currently, because of pandemic, some of the estimates are more than 230 million people will be forced into poverty, which is going to be a big setback for a country like India, where we have uh, uh, made some gains towards poverty elevation, but the large scale disaster have a impact to like they will impact the gains on a longer term. And the finally, disaster management will ensure that we have resilient development and system which will be able to bounce back. So as I have shown you in the previous slide, if you don't have a disaster management focus, then as a system, we won't be able to improve the overall capability of that system to bounce back better. Now, in terms of what role currently civil societies are playing, so largely I can think of this five elements. Communicate. So one is that we know what are the risks, how how effectively.
Just a second. Yeah. We'll just mute the participant.
How effectively we can communicate to various stakeholders. So be it the government administration, be it the private sector, be it academia. I think civil society plays a major role in terms of communicating the risk issues and the problems which communities are facing. The second is coordination. Like civil societies are one of the last mile connect, and they provide this agency of the people for communities to express their issues, as well as kind of seek the solutions. And civil society are best placed to coordinate some of this issue, where we can ensure that the the existing issues of the marginalized and the most weaker section of the society is being communicated as part of the overall coordination. The third one is collaborate. So there are lots of partnerships platforms which are working on the disaster management issues, and civil societies are best placed to collaborate, not only within the civil society but also outside of the civil society space, where we can collaborate with academia in terms of what are the key challenges on the ground, where we will require more research and talk and try to find out the solutions, and establish what are the key risks. The fourth one is about the cooperation. So we cooperate with various stakeholders and try to find solutions based on the problems which we are seeing. Finally, and the most important is innovate. I think because of the mandate of civil society, uh, I think we have some advantage in terms of bringing in innovation for some of the issues which we are facing around the disaster management issues. So there are also some civil societies who are also collaborating with some of the information technology firms in terms of how the artificial intelligence can be used to measure the impact of any disaster event on particular community. So that spectrum is huge in terms of innovating within the sector, and civil societies can play a bigger role. Now, finally, as a conclusion, some of the points which we feel as needs and based on our work. I think disaster management is cross-cutting issue, and this is applicable for any non-profit working on any issue. Like for an example, if you are working on education, then it's also necessary for you to see which are the major issues which are facing
Meher, are you there?
risk in those particular area within that education, whether like in terms of. Hello, hello,
We lost you for a second. You can
hello.
repeat your
Am I
point,
audible?
please. We can hear you
Okay.
now.
Yeah. So the first point is like disaster management is a cross-cutting issue. It's not in itself a sector. I think disaster management applies to all the sector where we have where we take the potential risk in that particular area in mind while we design any intervention, be it education related, be it health related, or be it agriculture related. I think there is an element of this risk in all those systems, and it's good to include disaster management thinking as part of the intervention. Second, disaster events are going to impact most the vulnerable, particularly the poor communities. And we need to find some of the solutions, be it like be it whether that can be looked from the education lens or a health lens or a livelihood lens. I think we need to see that how we are reaching out to these communities and reducing the suffering of such communities. The third point is like we need to be focused on the risk reduction and minimizing the losses of particular communities or the communities with whom we are working. And I think NGOs have a big role to play in identifying those losses and also trying to connect various stakeholders and think about the strategies which can minimize these losses. The, uh, we all are seeing the impact of climate change, and as per the current condition, I don't think so. We are going to meet the target of 1.5 degree or even 2 degree, and that is going to result in a in a catastrophic events or the impact of the event being large. And we all have to be mindful whenever we design any intervention, how we are taking the impact of the climate change as one of the key indicators. And finally, I think as a country, if you see the intervention around disaster management, I think we have had a good gains in terms of the emergency response. I think we have built those capabilities. But if you look at the data, I think each year in terms of the economic losses, there are more economic losses due to disasters. And as the development happens more, I think these losses will increase. So I think we all have to shift our mindset from that response focus to resilience focus, where we see that I'm not saying that response need is going to go away in anytime soon, but how consciously we are mindful that we build the existing systems in a way where the need for response is kind of reduced over the time. So yeah, these are some of the thoughts which I felt would be good to share with the participants. I would like to kind of invite my co-panelists to share few of his thoughts on the presentation and some of his ideas that how we can take this forward and how we can include more civil society in taking up this disaster management as one of the key areas of work in whatever they do. So yeah, so thank you all for your patient listening. Over to you, Ruap. Thanks.
Thank you, Meher, for that very enlightening set of slides. I think this presentation was very meaningful. Adelina, would you like to share something and intervene before I get on and I present my sort of reflections?
No, we're good. You can share reflections about the first section and yeah, we can move forward.
No, I think the first and foremost reflection is that Meher has made my life very easy. Whatever I was, and in fact, easy in a way that he's set that perspective, that right tone for me to share my thoughts on this subject. And I think it would rest is on the participants and the audience who are listening to us, but then there would be a strong interlinkage of what Mihir has shared, and I think his thoughts on building the final thoughts. I would take it from there of building more resilience. We've done a great job as a country. We've achieved a lot as a country from a relief and rescue perspective, of saving lives perspective. But I think the time has come when we build better resilience, because the infrastructure loss is just unacceptable. It brings us down. It pulls us back several years, in certain cases even decades of development work gets washed away, and I think, and literally washed away in certain cases. And I think we must really ensure that the last mile connectivity in our country, in all spectrums, and especially when it comes to the development sector, where non-profit organizations and NGOs are the final link between the communities and the administration. I think that linkage is very important, and their role is as I think urgent or as important as anything else is, maybe more in certain cases. And I would like to also thank ConnectFor, Adelina, Aishwarya for this opportunity to share my perspective, share perspective on the behalf of my organization also in a way, because we have been involved as far as Fiki is concerned. Okay, or I get that, yes. Okay. Satarupa, thank you. So yeah, I think she wants me to be a little louder, so I'll do that, yes. No, so yes, coming back to what Fiki does. In fact, that's the organization I've been part of and I've been representing for over 13 years now, major chunk of my lifetime. Fiki, as I'm sure a lot of people would know, but for the benefit of others who might not be aware, is perhaps the largest chamber of commerce, which was the foundation of which was laid by none other than the father of this nation, Mahatma Gandhi, in 1927. We presently have a membership base of direct and indirect members of over 250,000 across the country. State offices in almost every state, international offices across 10 different countries in the world. And it gives me a feeling of great pride to share with you that perhaps we are the only chamber in the country which is working so aggressively and so extensively in the area of disaster risk reduction for over 2 decades. And when I say over 2 decades, we've been involved since actively since I think the super cyclone hit the Odisha coast, and then the Bhuj earthquake, and that's where I think a full-fledged vertical within Fiki was developed. And we've been working with the government, with the central government agencies, especially the National Disaster Management Authority and the Ministry of Home Affairs. So we turn out to be the obvious private sector partners for them when it comes to disaster risk reduction and disaster management. I just wanted to share, before I share my presentation, a thought that, in an economy like India, where disaster is not just a natural phenomena, like an earthquake, or a cyclone, or probably climate-induced disasters. In our country, where a huge chunk of our population is below the poverty line, in my view, this is the biggest issue, the biggest disaster. And this major fragment of marginalized population, and when I say marginalized, I mean stakeholders of the community which are kept out of mainstream discussion, development discussion on the basis of their gender, the caste, the color, the religion, sexual orientation, age. Age is another very important factor based on which they are marginalized, and of course, poverty is another category in which populations are marginalized. So this major fragment of marginalized population is the one which is severely impacted in case of disasters. So we as a country need to focus and work in this area to reduce the vulnerability of this population. And as we move forward, build capacities and create awareness, create opportunities, better livelihoods, generate livelihoods, we can certainly impact the bottom of the pyramid population and work towards an inclusive development. I think with this thought, the biggest stakeholder which comes to the mind of anyone who's looking into this subject is the civil society sector, the organizations, the not-for-profit organizations who are working on the ground. And we at Fiki are very closely working with them. We have a dedicated socio-economic development foundation for a lot of people, for information, a lot of people on this call. Fiki's SEDF is in itself a registered foundation which works with a lot of organizations like yours, a lot of NPOs like yours, and I would encourage you to write into them and to share your expertise or your projects or your areas of work with them, and you probably could work with them in partnership also. Fiki also, before I get on to my slides, is the only chamber in the world to be the secretariat for UNDRR's ARISE network, which is a network of private and public sector entities, which in conjunction with the UNDRR works towards a resilient, prosperous future where fewer lives are lost to disasters, capital assets, and investments, to make better risk-informed decisions. So it's a network of private and public sector individuals and organizations, and we are the only chamber in the world, and we handle the India chapter of this particular initiative. So yes, when it comes to disaster risk management, we're doing pretty much a lot of things across all sectors, and also what Mihir mentioned, that it's a cross-cutting theme. It's clearly one of the only cross-cutting themes which comes to my mind when you talk about naming themes, like, because this would touch upon almost everything. And that's why I say very strongly that all the NGOs, NPOs, the civil society organizations are intentionally or unintentionally working in the area of disaster risk reduction. They are making a contribution, because if you are reducing vulnerability, if you are reducing risk in any ways through development in education, health, wash, anything, you are basically reducing risk of the communities. And I think you are, in a way, in a big way, contributing to the disaster risk reduction mandate of this country. So I would quickly now like to share my presentation, which is right here. I hope it is visible.
Yes.
Brilliant. I'll try and put it in full screen.
Can you, yeah, it's on full screen now.
Yeah. So it's flashy thanks to my dear colleague Akhil. He's made it look, it was a piece of paper till last night, and he converted it into a PPT, a big expert. He's the backbone of our several initiatives. In fact, at Fiki, we have a small team of Akhil, Mainak, Varun, and we report to the Secretary General and the DSG, where we work on a lot of initiatives where in which we do capacity development and resilience building in industries, especially in industries, MSMEs, small and micro industries, because that is also where what you must have heard what happened in HPCL plant yesterday, the big blast, and what happened on the 7th of May last year at Vizag LG polymer plant. I think all of these incidents which we try and cater to such incidents, we try and build capacities amongst industries all across the country to be better prepared to deal with such situations, and best to not, ensure that such incidents do not happen. So yes, there are a list of things which we do, but I'll stick to now the role of disaster management non-profits in communities. The SENDAI Framework, I mean, for DRR, we all are aware. If you are not from a DRR background, I would still recommend that, I'm sure you would have come across this framework, but do sort of go through them, and I'm sure you would find a lot of commonalities in what you do, which reflect in these set of frameworks, which we set were in 2015 at SENDAI. Clearly, the SENDAI framework has built upon the Hugo framework, which was a framework before that, and establishes 7 global targets. Very clearly, the 7 global targets. All of society engagement, greater emphasis on all of society engagement, inclusive business development, including development, by involving marginalized groups. And we've already spoken about this, what the marginalized groups mean here. It means, an inclusive development will only mean when there is, when the engagement is proper, is inclusive. It includes all the sections of marginalized. And if I miss the word disabilities, I think that is also very important. The differently able community plays a very, very important role, and I think they should also be a part of this. And let me just take you to those 7 global targets which were set under this, the SENDAI framework. Now, reduction in mortality, reduction in number of people affected, reduction in economic losses, reduction in loss of infrastructure. Oops. Yeah. reduction in loss of infrastructure, formulation of national and local strategies, access to early warnings, internal cooperation. And you can imagine as an NPO, how many of these verticals you are already working in. So these are the fundamental 7 pillars. And I'll go back to the same slide where we will talk about more on this. The local level emphasis was never as much as it was through the SENDAI framework. The framework is brimming with references to local level action, because it has been realized globally that without the local level action, where the NPOs, the NGOs make the most impact, without that intervention, these targets, any target for that matter, any social development targets cannot be achieved. So much greater emphasis on engagement with sectors as opposed to standalone DRR measures. This also implies greater focus on stopping the creation of new risks through mainstreaming in development. I think that's a very, very important statement which comes out of the SENDAI framework. What does it mean in India? From an Indian context, let's be very clear. Against 3 of these 7 targets which I just read out, we are making substantial progress. I mean, we have made progress in reducing the loss of lives from disasters, improving access to early warnings, and international cooperation. I'll give you a quick example of loss of lives, how we've done well in that. In 1999 super cyclone, we lost almost over 100,000 people. Oh, sorry, 10,000 people. Sorry, 10,000 people. In pardon me for poor stats, but then that's the sort of numbers we lost. In cyclone Amphan, which happened last year, we lost less than 50 lives, maybe somewhere around 20. So we've come a long way. But from an infrastructure loss point of view, we lost $7 billion US, and majority of that, a huge chunk, was in power infrastructure. So that comes under, when I earlier said about resilient infrastructure, these are the sectors which the government needs to focus on. But we have done a great job as a community to save lives, to improve access to early warning systems and international cooperation. We made progress in reducing loss of lives. We need to do more in number of people affected through these infrastructure loss. We made substantial progress in developing state-level plans on disaster risk reduction. All states and UTs have completed their state-level plans. However, the penetration on DRR planning at the district level and below is relatively low. So except in some coastal districts where the extreme weather event is an annual phenomena, sometimes a biannual phenomena somewhere, and somewhere it happens twice in a year as well. The coverage of DRR plans at block tehsil level is better in coastal areas, but in other areas inside the mainlands, it's not that high. It's not that great. Local level action is critical for going beyond saving lives to saving livelihoods, vulnerability reduction as well. In a large country like ours, the pattern of risk are highly varied. For example, the cause and type of flood risk in different river basins of a country are very different. In fact, even within the same river basin, the issues that make people vulnerable are sometimes different. So there are a lot of local issues which are seldom captured in the national picture. Therefore, local level action that is based on in-depth understanding of local level processes is imperative for achieving disaster resilience for the country and for the communities as well. And how can the civil societies really contribute, and what the civil societies do, the not-for-profits, the NGOs. So our civil society organizations already play an active role in disaster response. That's something which I also mentioned earlier. They are anyways an integral part of disaster response or disaster risk reduction in the country. There are very good examples from post-earthquake and post-tsunami recovery reconstruction programs, where civil society has played an important role in timely and effective recovery, like community counseling, something what the government cannot perform. And here, tsunami is a big example. The world used to visit US and its big universities and colleges to talk about post-trauma stress disorder. But since tsunami, the focus has actually come to India, and the learnings are going out of India that how a community as badly affected as community in Tamil Nadu and the coastal regions could come back to normal in such short span of time. So I think this is where the NGOs and the not-for-profit played the fundamental game-changing role, I would say. So I think that is something very, very important, a strong contribution of the civil society. However, we need to do more on the risk reduction front, and there are three key areas. I'll be wrapping up soon. These are the three key areas which we need to focus on. Link disaster risk reduction with issues of local development. I think many civil society organizations are working on the variety of development issues at the local level already. There is a large possibility to use these ongoing initiatives for doing risk reduction as well. They're already, it's just about perhaps 10% or 15% deviation, and you would end up dealing with the bigger agenda of risk reduction. Support government schemes such as the Housing for All, particularly at the local level, and find innovative ways for integrating low-cost disaster risk reduction practices under these. I think this actually also happens in a way that you create assets for these people, and I think these assets are very important in case of a disaster situation. They become more handy than what relief materials and what rescues which happen after an event occurs. But the assets which these communities hold, they become the first line of defense for dealing with a disaster situation. So taking risk reduction to the local level is the key. Work alongside the governments in taking risk reduction to the local level. There are many examples of community-based disaster risk management supported by NGOs, but these are seldom taken on the large enough scale to ensure 100% coverage. They call it saturation also. On this, the civil society needs to work closely, in particular with the district administration. I think that is the core. District administration is the most empowered administration in the system. They need partners, they need cooperation, coordination. And I think anyways, in today's time, the NGOs and our civil society works very closely with them. But it needs to be enhanced from a disaster risk reduction perspective as well. So I would quickly conclude, NGOs must recognize that development and disasters are interconnected. I mean, that is the fundamental statement coming out of the discussion. Lopsided development will enhance risk, vulnerability, and exposure, and cause loss of lives and disruption of livelihoods. So all NGOs must work on DRR if poverty alleviation and vulnerability reduction needs to be achieved. So this is where the SENDAI Framework, the Paris Agreement of Climate Change, the SDGs, and the New Urban Agenda becomes very critical. The dialogues such as the one we are all part of today should be an ongoing process and undertaken in a constructive spirit. We have a huge DRR agenda in front of us, and it is imperative that we work together, taking the all of society approach enshrined in the SENDAI Framework. All of society means inclusive. It means there should be no one who should be left out. All the marginalized groups, we need to involve all of them as important stakeholders of development-related decision making. That will be it from me. Any questions? Over to you, Adelina. Mayor, if you have any reflections, I would really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much, Ribha. We had two questions that were raised in our RSVP forms when the attendees registered for our webinar. Ribha and Mihir, maybe you can highlight on those points if you'd like. So what are some of the best practices to work with communities regarding disaster management? And how can an NGO that has not worked on disaster management contribute in case of any disaster?
So the best practices will depend on what is your own activity. So as I've told you, if some NGO is working on education, the best practices will vary compared to a NGO who is working on a community development issues. But there are, let's say, as Ruab mentioned, there are good case studies of community-based disaster risk reduction program, which has been started by NGO, but scaled up by some of the government programs also. So there are list of those best practices available online. Like if you are interested, I can share the link also. Um, but for an example, in education, there are lots of NGOs, including NGO including our own NGO. We have a safe school program, which is talking about the safety within the school, and how you have different interventions, like starting from a school disaster management plan to ensuring that the learning environment related elements are part of the schools or even Anganwadi. So, so those kind of interventions can be part of some of the work for NGOs working on the educational issues. For the health issues also, there can be issues related to the improving of the health infrastructure itself. Um, so there are lots of areas where the power connectivity is a problem, and there can be a solution like solar power or off-grid kind of solution for those kind of infrastructure. So yeah, these are some of the work which civil societies are already doing, and if anybody is interested, I think there are enough material available on this. Sorry, Adelina, what was the second question?
Yes, just a second. So how can a non-profit who's not directly involved with disaster management can contribute towards the cause?
Yeah. So I think, as I have in my presentation, explained the various phases of disaster. So based on the interest of that NGO, they have to identify that which phase they want to work in. Like for an example, you can also do a effective response work. It's not that there is no room for improvement there. So if you feel that yes, you have a very good connect within the community where you can quickly identify the most needy out of those communities, then maybe you can get into the response and relief distribution. If your interest is more around the education part, then you have to see whether you can get into the early recovery phase or even the long term resilience building. So depending on your own mandate and strength, I think what Ruab has also mentioned and what I am also trying to say is that disaster management is not a rocket science. It's more of a common sense for me at least. What you have to do is you just have to extend your own work and see that from a disaster management point of view, and then you will identify a few of the activities which you can take up. So it's not that any NGO who is working currently on a different topic can't do anything on disaster management. I think they just have to think that what if the disaster strikes to the community for whom they are working, and then think backwards. So yeah.
I agree with you, Mihir. In fact, what you also mentioned, in your presentation, and I think while answering this question, that community resilience building, through training programs of stakeholder groups, is another way of, these NGOs who have not worked in the disaster management to contribute. Because, community resilience building, they're anyways, it was discussed earlier, the education, health, all these things you do, that those interventions are to build resilience in the communities. I think aligning them and reflecting through them on disaster risk reduction is an easier task. Is not rocket science, as Meir mentioned. But I think these community resilience building, through the programs which are being already undertaken by these NGOs, is a great way to contribute to disaster management, and mobilizing the PRIs, the ULBs, SHGs, youth clubs, and these Mahila Mandals, which I'm sure Mihir and Seeds are doing a phenomenal job working with them. The ex-servicemen, civil defense, home guards, NSS, NYKS, all these scouts and guides, educated housewives, elected representatives, all of them. I think for an overall community, resilience building, I think is something which all the NGOs can really focus on, and that would be direct contribution to disaster risk reduction.
We've got a few more questions in chat box just now. One question.
There is also, Adelina, there is.
Yes, Mihir? Yes, Mihir, we are able to hear you. Can you unmute your microphone?
No, I was just adding. Are you able to hear?
We can now. We can continue.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that we have also seen now this need of including the, let's say, the aspect of this digital with the issues of disaster management. There is already this one program by the government of India on the digital volunteers. That how, because let's say, even though we made progress so far, we don't really know right now in terms of what kind of various losses which is being incurred by the communities. And there is also a scope where civil society can play a role in like using the technology. So that can also be like one of the area where civil society can play a role.
Absolutely, the virtual setting, I think, and when the digital gap was something that not many nonprofits focused on, but with the pandemic, it's given a lot more focus and a lot more skilling has been done with respect to that. We have two questions in the chat box right now. One is that in the past few years, we have seen an increasing trend of disasters, even comparing from last year to the current year. What will be the situation in the coming 10 years, in your opinion? And the second question is on, basically we spoke of being prepared for emergencies and disasters, right? Now, funding and finance are definitely an area of concern for most of the nonprofits. So how can we change this trend even with respect to the way corporates view disaster management?
Yeah, so I can answer the first one, and maybe Roab, if you can touch upon the second one. So yeah, I think in terms of the vulnerability, Bhupendra, I think what we are seeing is that those issues are going to increase because of the impact of the climate change. We have also come out with the report called Face of Disasters. That is available on our website. That looks into this area, that how the disaster are going to change for the next 10 years in terms of the impact. And what that tells us is that we need to be prepared even more. And that's what the message is. That's why even we are also kind of actively advocating about building resilience rather than focusing on response, because response is not a good answer. And as you see a big response, that means there is a less resilience in that system. And until unless we don't improve that, we are going to see the same situation in terms of the response. And partly you also have a linkage to second question, so let Ruab answer that. And
yes, I agree. In fact, Mr. Mishra, I have a very brief answer to your second part of your question. In the last 15 months, I think the entire landscape has changed. The understanding of the private sector, which would prefer shying away from investing or from contributing towards preparedness activities, that entire mindset has changed, because all of us have suffered equally in this pandemic. So preparedness has never been highlighted in a bigger manner. So all the advocates for preparedness it has made their lives very easy. And I think you would see that significant change coming into our society also, and even in the private and the public sector. You would find, there would be a detailed presentation and detailed advocacy 15 months prior on how to encourage the corporate sector to invest in preparedness and mitigation. But I think they've got the answers to a lot of questions they used to ask us, or they would have asked you. So try, get back and reach out to them. They would be much more receptive to new projects and new plans which deal with preparedness. And this is coming from personal professional experience in the past literally 4 months. We've got offers. We would earlier we would have chased those corporates maybe a couple of years back, and now they are reaching out to us that how they can they can invest. And in fact, you'd use the word investment, because disaster risk reduction, believe me, is a business opportunity. And the businesses, the corporates who look into this sector as a business opportunity would benefit many-fold than normal businesses what they execute, because they're here, and I don't want to mix my words. They can invest their corporate social responsibility funds also, and I'm saying they can invest those funds here, and they will get returns. So now they see the business opportunity aspect coming out of the recent crisis, and they would now want to not only be prepared for a similar pandemic or multiple waves, but otherwise also from industrial safety point of view, community resilience point of view, community as in the community around their facilities, all of that. So you'll see a very distinct difference in their approach going forward.
Just to add, I think there are enough research at the global level which has kind of also given a financial logic to it. Like $1 invested in terms of preparedness or disaster risk reduction will save $4. If you don't do that, you have to spend that $4 as part of your response. So people who are also in business, they also see a financial sense. And it's not only about business, I think it's also about the government. I think now government has also started realizing the importance of resilience building rather than spending more on the response. But the other aspect is also, let's say in my slide, I've shown that the media focuses more when there is any bad event happening. And that also contributes in terms of how people think and also how people give, because NGOs are dependent on the giving of either corporates or communities. And media also has a big role to play, that they have to shift that focus from the response or a disaster focus to risk reduction. So there is also scope there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ribab and Mihir, for addressing those queries. Moving forward, in closing, I'd like to thank all attendees for taking their time for being a part of our event. And thank you so much, Mihir and Ribab, for sharing such excellent insights today. And I'd like to thank the audience for being a wonderful set of audience and for sharing your questions in our chat and in the RSVP form that we had shared. I request you to fill the feedback form, as it will help us to curate many more sessions like these. My team member Aishwarya has already shared the link with you all in the Zoom chat box. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, any more questions, you can put in your queries on the feedback form, and we can request the speakers to answer them via an email post the webinar. We hope to see you all for a webinar on boosting volunteer engagement at NGOs, which is scheduled for 2nd of June, which is a Wednesday. The details of the same will be shared with you all in the chat box shortly. And yes, that is all for today. Thank you so much. I hope to connect with you again. Thank you. Thank you, Mihir. Thank you, Ribab.